Good day to you. In my paper, The Role of Social Movements in Democratisation, I want to use case studies from Thailand to ask 4 important questions about social movements. What kind of social movements expand the democratic space? What can we say about civil society, the middle class, and the NGOs in relation to democratisation? I want to discuss the relationship between social movements and political parties. And finally, I want to talk about how we view social movements in a historical and international dimension. Of course, I will end up by making a few points about what is needed in terms of the democratic process in Thailand. If we look around the world, we see a confusing array of different social movements, all claiming to, in some way, be trying to expand the democratic space, whether it be in the Middle East, whether it be in Southeast Asia, and so on, or Latin America. In Thailand, we've seen both the People's Alliance for Democracy and the People's Democratic Reform Committee, social movements of the middle classes, social movements which look down on the poor. We've also seen on the other side of the spectrum the red shirts, or the UDD, who have been struggling against the military dictatorship. Now, it would be useful to just briefly talk about the roots of the Thai crisis. The roots of the Thai political crisis go back to the economic crisis in 1996 and attempts by Thaksin Shinawatra, a mobile phone businessman, to modernize the Thai economy so that it became or would become more competitive on the world market. Previously, Thai governments had failed to develop the infrastructure or technology and to pull people out of poverty in a way that would enhance productivity and increase competitiveness. So Thaksin's party was a party of big business, but it also was a party that had populist policies like universal health care, job creation, and so on. And under these circumstances, it won a couple of general election victories. It managed to win the hearts and minds of ordinary people. And this really angered the conservative elites who were edged out of power by the Thaksin's electoral machine. And the middle class came out and demonstrated in alliance with the military and the conservatives. And this led to the first military coup in 2006. The military have remained behind the scenes since then, and they manipulated a number of governments. The judiciary, the conservative elites have overthrown elected governments allied to Thaksin, and in addition to this, they have used violence on the streets to shoot down pro-democracy demonstrators from the red shirt movement. And this continued violence is the reason why we have a military junta today that came to power in 2014. Now, the situation in Thailand raises the question about whether civil society and the middle classes are really a force for democratization, because this is the mainstream political theory in academia for a long time, and it has been proved to be wrong in the case of Thailand, where the middle class is mobilizing against democracy, and the NGOs joining them in that mobilization as well. Now, there's another theory that about the new social movement, saying that they have nothing to do with class. But again, in the case of Thailand, the mobilization of the red shirts from mainly peasant and working class background shows that class is very, very important. Now, when we're talking about social movements, we have to discuss whether the social movements are social movements from above or below, because I think that this determines whether or not they'll be mobilizing to expand the democratic space or to protect the status quo. The middle class protesters, whether they be the People's Alliance for Democracy or the People's Democratic Reform Committee or the yellow-shirted royalists, are basically a movement created from above, mobilized by the ruling class in order to maintain the status quo in the face of threats against the system. And top businessmen, government officials and the military and even the royal family have supported the yellow shirts. On the opposite side, the red shirts cannot be classified as a social movement created from above, despite the fact that they have been led politically by Thaksin Shinawatra and politicians from his party. This is because they have been organized at a grassroots level. There's been a lot of self-organization, and most of the red shirts actually were fighting to expand the democratic space against the entrenched conservative structures. Really, we need to see the relationship between Thaksin's politicians and the red shirt movement as some kind of dialectic or contradictory relationship, where they're united in fighting against the dictatorship, but for different purposes. The grassroots red shirts fighting for democracy and dignity and to increase their standard of living, whereas Thaksin allied with them but fighting for his own interests in order to fight against his competitors in the Thai ruling elite. Now, the relationship between Thaksin's political party and the red shirts raises a very important question concerning social movements, and that is the relationship between social movements and political parties. Because if there are no political parties organized, the social movements don't have a constant presence. They go up and they go down, they disappear. But on the other hand, if the political parties come to dominate the social movements, then it will distort the aims of the social movements away from their original position. So there needs to be a balance. Now, this debate about the presence of political parties or the need to shun political parties is something that's taken place throughout the world. You can see it with the Indignados movement in Spain, which started out turning their back on political parties in a rather autonomist or anarchist view. But then later on, a political party, Podemos, arising out of this because of the shortcomings of social movements which are not allied to a political party. We also see this in the case of Syriza in Greece, which has evolved out of the various social movements in Greece that existed beforehand. The tensions between political parties in Brazil, like the PT and the landless peasant movement, are also part of this debate about whether or not you need political parties or you should have autonomous social movements. And This debate goes back to the beginning of the 20th century with the autonomous movements rejecting political parties, but then realizing that they needed political parties with the example of the Russian Revolution and so on. The debate carries on to this day. What is the correct relationship between the two? Now, for Marxists like myself, we see social movements as not something that arise out of nothing and then disappear, but are part of a long process, a bit like a tree with many branches, and each branch representing the movement at a particular time. Now, this means that the red shirt movement in Thailand should be seen as something that's linked to past struggles for democracy, for example, in the 1970s. And you can see that people learn or consider the lessons from the past. Some of people are even involved in previous struggles and so on. So we need to look at social movements in a historical dimension. We also need to look at social movements in an international dimension. Here we see red shirts holding up French breadsticks because this was a symbol that was used in the Arab Spring in Tunisia. And this sign here is supposedly the Egyptian branch of the red shirts, although it comes from a province in the northeast. International links with Thailand going other ways have also occurred, with the Greek polytechnic students shouting Thailand, Thailand, Thailand after the students in Thailand overthrew the military dictatorship in the 1970s. This here is a distortion of an international link, with reactionary royalists wearing Guy Fawkes masks copied from the Occupy movement. Now, we do need to consider the relationship between the labour movement and social movements, because the labour movements in the Middle East have added industrial or economic power to the struggle for democracy. And in Thailand, the problem was that the links were too weak in order to sustain the movement. Finally, I want to talk about what has happened since the 2014 coup. These pictures are pictures of spontaneous demonstrations which erupted after the coup d'etat in May 2014. The problem is that they were easily repressed by the military because they weren't properly coordinated. There wasn't a mass movement with a unified political organization behind it. This year, we've also seen sporadic student protests that have occurred, but they have tended to be symbolic. And again, the fact that they're fractured, non-coordinated, and so on means that they have been easily repressed. Now, the students have had a discussion about what needs to be done. Unfortunately, some of them believe that social media is the answer, and yet really social media is merely a communications tool. It's not something that can really mobilize people like this picture here, where 500,000 people were mobilized on the streets of Bangkok in the 1970s. We need to learn the lessons of the building of mass movements and political parties in the 1970s, which allowed this to happen, because the present military junta is designing a constitution where Big Brother will always be around in the background. It's a constitution similar to the Burmese one created by the junta, and here a Thai military personnel is hugging with a lot of love the representative of the Burmese military. Of course, there is much more detail in my paper, which you're very welcome to read. But in the moment, at the moment, given the fact that Thaksin and his allies in the UDD leadership have demobilized the red shirts, and given the fact that the opposition to the military is fragmented and not united in a political organization, we urgently need to go back and learn the lessons of building mass political movements in order to restore democracy to Thailand. Thank you very much.